Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Aging Gracefully, a talk show for Evergreens. We have another interesting topic for our discussion today: physical activity and exercise for the elderly. Research has consistently shown that maintaining an active lifestyle contributes to improved physical health, mental well-being, and overall quality of life. Our experts today are Father Juvie and Dr. Mario Vaz, who will talk about the pros and cons of physical activity and exercise for the elderly. All of you all know Father Juvie has been with us for all the episodes, Father. Father Juvie is a well-known Redemptorist and a scripture professor, and he has served in the General Council in Rome for many years. Father Juvie, we love to have you on our show. Welcome. Dr. Mario Vaz is a medical doctor and professor who taught human physiology in St. John's Medical College for 32 years. He has since retired and is currently working at the International Medical School, Ramaya University campus. His other interests are bioethics and the history of medicine. Welcome, Dr. Mario, and thank you for taking time out to be with us for this discussion.
Thank you.
And I would like to welcome our dear audience. I hope you will enjoy this show, and welcome again.
It's nice to have you, Mario, once again on yet another platform. I've known Mario over the years, and he has contributed much in different fields. In fact, he's one of the co-founders of the Catholic Doctors Association in Bangalore. He was one of those who initiated the Bioethics Forum in Bangalore, and it has contributed some really wonderful material to make ethics and meaning of life more accessible on different forum. That's another part. He's written several articles and authored and co-authored books as well. And so Mario brings into this conversation not only his academic knowledge, but his expertise, his experience. And so it's wonderful, Mario, to be with you together on this panel today.
Thank you for having me.
Father Juvie, would you like to share why we chose this topic of, physical activity and exercise for the elderly?
Yes, I mean, we've been looking at this whole dimension of aging, or what I like to call it healthy aging, all through these different episodes that we've been looking at. It's almost coming up to a year now with all the various dimensions we've looked at. There's a saying that all of us want to live long, but no one wants to grow old. The Italians have a fascinating phrase, might sound a bit cynical even if it's in jest. They say, La vecchiaia è una brutta malattia. That means old age is a terrible sickness. Now, it need not be so. And that's why these conversations are meant to enable us to look at this whole aging process that is inevitable for all of us. But how do we make the best of it? And so when we've been looking at the different dimensions of this healthy aging, we've looked at it from various perspectives. We've looked at it from the perspective, the spiritual perspective of faith, because health really is so comprehensive. It embraces different dimensions: the body, the mind, the spirit. We've been looking at the spiritual dimension underlying no matter what themes we've looked at over these past months. But that's not the only part, because each have a significant influence on the other. In the last few episodes, we've looked at mental health, when the dimensions that arise out of it, how do we respond to it, how do we become aware of it, how do we become better educated about it. And so it's a natural segue. It follows so easily that we now look at the physical health that we need to look at. You know, we might know in theory that the body is what we have and therefore we need to take care of it. That might be just an intellectual consideration. Hopefully through our conversation today, we might tease out or spell out other aspects of this, the physical health, the body, and the exercise that we need, so that this whole process of healthy aging will be something that we embrace rather than we dread or shun the very fact that we age. So the conversation that we have, hopefully, will lead us further down this path.
Dr. Mario, I would like to ask you, how does physical activity help with aging?
So actually physical activity helps us throughout our lives. Yeah, so it's not something that we should specifically look at in terms of aging. I just want to start off by saying that if we are physically active children, we tend to track in that activity as we grow older. There's a process which is called tracking. So active children tend to be active adults. But as we become older, aging itself is a risk factor for certain medical conditions, heart disease, our bones become weaker. We may develop high blood pressure. Some of us may develop diabetes. So these are things which regular physical activity and exercise can help to prevent. And if we even have those conditions, then it can sometimes help to reduce the medication that the person requires. Apart from this, there are benefits beyond medical conditions. Physical activity helps us feel good. It elevates our mood. In the context of aging, it actually delays the onset of dementia. It improves our cognitive ability, our ability to reason, to think as we become older. But it also has social benefits. When I was, this morning when I got up and I went to buy milk at the milk booth, I saw people who were walking on the roads. And some of them were walking alone, but there were others who were walking as a couple, or even three or four people walking together. So it helps to avoid the issue of social isolation. And as people exercise, maybe as they move into groups, they can derive social support from the people that they move in. So the benefits are enormous as we age. So one of the issues as we grow older is that around the 4th decade of life, we slowly start losing muscle mass, and this continues as we grow older. But this is not inevitable. At least the rate at which we lose muscle mass is not inevitable. We can delay that. We can slow the rate of loss of muscle mass, and along with that slowing of the rate of muscle mass loss, we can retain muscle strength and muscle function, which is extremely important in old people, because older people have a tendency for falls.
Correct.
And so when muscle mass is retained, and when we retain strength and we retain function, the likelihood of falls is reduced. We call this loss of muscle mass sarcopenia, which actually comes from the Greek. It has a Greek origin, sarco meaning flesh and penia meaning poverty. So it is a state where there is a poverty of flesh. And physical activity can help reduce this process of sarcopenia.
Oh, okay. That's interesting. And how much physical activity is required? Should precautions be taken to, avoid
problems with physical activity?
Yes.
So there are certain guidelines. Okay, and if you look at the popular press, you keep getting all these articles which tell you that you should try and achieve 10,000 steps a day, maybe 12,000. But there are certain guidelines which suggest, and I don't want to be prescriptive, because as you grow older, and particularly at different ages, different people have different problems which prevent them from doing certain exercise. So I don't want to say upfront, this is what everyone has to achieve. But what is suggested, if you can do these exercises, and there is a difference between physical activity and exercise. So physical activity is any bodily movement which helps us burn calories. So when you brush your teeth, when you cook, when you wipe dishes, it's all physical activity. Whereas exercise is planned physical activity, it's structured. And we usually do it because we want some benefit at the end of it, right? We either want to lose weight, we want to become more fit, we want to prevent some health outcome, some medical problem because we either have a family history or a risk factor, something like that. So there are many things that we need to know. So how much? That's what you asked me. Sorry.
No.
So what is suggested is that we should try and achieve at least about 30 minutes of what we would call aerobic activity, where we are at least walking briskly for about 30 minutes a day for at least 5 days in the week. All right, that's one of the things that we should try and achieve. Now, obviously, we may not, depending on our health conditions, we may not all be able to do this, but that's a recommendation. But as we grow older, we can't just walk. I mean, if we just walk or we just increase our physical activities at home and we don't have an impediment to doing more, then we are not achieving the full benefits of physical activity and exercise. So on at least 2 days of the week, it is recommended that we do some sort of resistance exercises. These are exercises which we do to maintain our muscle mass and our muscle strength. But there are two other types of exercise which we need to do as we get older. One is just the simple act of stretching. I don't know, how many of you all get up in the morning and feel, I'm a little stiff? I don't know, yeah?
I'm a little stiff all the time.
I'm definitely stiff. I sometimes get up with some pains in my joints. I don't know, you don't seem to have the problem at all.
Not yet, but I keep stretching irrespective of that.
Okay. So there is a category of physical activity called, which just involves stretching. And stretching is good because it helps to loosen our bodies. It helps us to relieve some of that pain that we have. And I think that's good to start off with before we start doing anything. And as we get older, it's also important for us to maintain balance. And so there are specific exercises that can be done to improve balance and coordination. And that's important to prevent falls in the elderly. Because as you get older and older, a fall is more than just a fall, right? You could get a fracture of the bones. It could make you bedridden for some time at least. So there are other complications. It makes you dependent on others. And we all know that as you get older, that's one thing you don't want to happen, right?
True.
You keep hoping that you won't be dependent on others. So that. In terms of safety, are there safeguards which you should do? Yes. I think this program shouldn't get people to suddenly decide, okay, I'm now going to go out and run. Yes. All right? If you haven't seen a doctor for some time, if you've been sedentary, if you've been physically inactive, if you have any underlying medical condition, if you suffer from respiratory breathing problems like asthma, if you have a heart condition, if you have diabetes or high blood pressure and you haven't seen a doctor in a while, if you get chest pain when you start moving around, or even if you haven't seen a doctor before, it's a good thing to get a checkup. Because, and particularly, don't just go out and get so motivated by the talk that you end up going and doing, because too much of something can also cause a problem, right? So these are precautions. And there are other things which I think most people take care of, but it's worth mentioning again. If you're going to walk out and it's summer, please make sure that you're hydrated, particularly for older people. Make sure you're carrying water. Make sure that when you come home, if you've walked outside, that you get a good drink of water, right? Okay. So does that sort of give you a sense?
Yes. Thank you so much.
I liked the way you put it, because you made a distinction between activity and physical exercise. And of course, as you said, I hope nobody will be motivated to join the Senior Olympics or something like that. I was recalling, maybe it's just an anecdote, but there was somebody who said that he bought his flat on the second floor. He says, because at least that will motivate me to do exercise. But as he grew older, it became exertion rather than exercise, and over which he had no choice, because in exercise, basically you're making a choice. But here he had no choice. And so what might be possible in our earlier years could become a handicap or an obstacle in later years, and we don't really think so far down the line. So I like the distinction that you made and the clarity you've given on that.
Yeah, thank you. No, we have to actually be, I think, aware of the fact that what we can do today is not something that we might necessarily be able to do later.
True.
And that is also the reason why I don't want to give general prescriptions and say, when I use the word aerobic, I really don't want people to say, okay, now I've got to go and run for, the 5-10 kilometer run, Bangalore run or whatever. But I think it is important for us to introspect on how we can increase our physical activity during the day. Because we actually don't spend the whole of our days exercising, right? That's a very small part.
Correct.
Many of us have made some sort of a commitment maybe to exercise, to actually spend a little time doing some structured activity. But for the most part, we are doing what our daily life requires us to do. Okay, in terms of our household chores or in terms of other things. But I think it's worth introspecting on how much we can increase those sort of activities, because we spend a large part of our day in that. So, for instance, I know that when some people shop and they go by car, they want to take the car right up to the door, preferably inside the shop, right? But it's okay to park your car a little distance away and then walk, because you have to walk. Now, there's some things I'm trying to do for myself as well. I could get milk delivered to my flat, but I don't do that. I go and walk to the milk booth and I get it. I get a nice conversation with the man who actually sells the milk as well. Because he's always keeping me up to date about what the news is. And so I start my day not only getting a bit of a walk, but also getting the news as well. So I think we need to look at that. Within our homes, we may be sitting a lot of the time watching our favorite television program, or maybe watching a video, or maybe listening to music. And sometimes we can get so comfortable, we just don't want to get up, right? Yes. So there are ways of getting yourself to move. Sometimes you lose the remote. That happens a lot in my house. So we have to keep getting up to search where the last person kept the remote. But there are things where we can do consciously. We can decide that every 20 minutes, we put a pause on what we're doing on the television. We move. We get to it. There is a disadvantage to sitting down a lot. And that is, when we sit down a lot, the circulation of our blood slows down to our legs. But apart from that, we also, when we do things that we really like we sit down and watch television, which we really like our programs, we tend to eat while we're doing that, right? So we need to look at these things together, because there are so many things, but we need to introspect on how we can add those steps to our day without necessarily going out and saying, I have to walk for 20 minutes, when I can't do that. Yes. Because there are many people who can't do that. True. Yeah.
You're so descriptive, as though you're examining our collective conscience.
We have Dr. Anuja, who's a physiotherapist, and she will speak now.
So thank you all for having me on this episode. I really appreciate it, and I love this topic, especially because I myself love working with the aging population and people who might be having cognitive changes as they age as well. So when we talk about precautions, I'm going to just review a little bit of what Dr. Vaz spoke about the types of exercise that we recommend and precautions related to them. So the first type of exercise that we would recommend is, like he said, aerobic exercise. And again, typically we recommend 150 minutes a week. So typically you split that with 30-minute sessions 5 days a week. And when you're doing aerobic exercise, you want to make sure that you're really monitoring your heart rate and your level of exertion. Now, some of us might have activity trackers that let us look at our heart rate, but a lot of times we don't, and that's okay. What you can do instead is think about how much exertion you feel like you're putting out. Now, you don't want to be at a state of rest or relaxation, right? That's not what we consider exercise. You want to be doing something that's, pushing yourself a little bit, but you also don't want to be at the other end of the spectrum where you feel like your heart is just, pushing out of your chest and you're going to collapse at any point, right? So you want to be in this in-between stage. On a scale of 1 to 10, I say around 3 to 6 is a good amount of exertion during those 30 minutes. Of course, the rest of the day, when you're doing other forms of physical activity, you can be, closer to that relaxed state, or maybe a little bit of work. But specifically during that exercise time, you want to be between that 3 and 6. Now, the second part is resistance training or strength training. Now, tomorrow, I don't want you to go and just start lifting, 5 kg dumbbells, but I do want you to have a little bit of challenge. I always say that without challenge, there's no change, right? And so we want to make sure that there's a level of, like with aerobic exercise, you're pushing yourself a little bit. Now, you might start that simply with just doing no weights at all, because that's something, resistance training is something that's new to you. You might use something very light, like a water bottle or a can that gives you just a little bit of weight at home, okay? Then you can maybe move on to, if you feel like that's pretty easy, then you can move on to utilizing resistance bands that gives you a little bit more push, and then move on to utilizing dumbbells. Now, one thing to remember also is that you don't want to consistently do the same exercise at the same weight for the rest of your life. You should be able to slowly increase no matter what your age is. If you are consistent with your resistance training, you will be able to increase that. All right. And then the third one is flexibility or stretching, right? Now, again, with flexibility and stretching, if you're doing something where you're, reaching for your toes or you're opening up your chest, you should feel like, okay, I am getting some kind of stretch. It might not always be a comfortable feeling, okay? I think a lot of times my patients tell me, oh, this is a little uncomfortable. It's not feeling like relaxed. That's okay. After you stop the stretch, if you are still feeling uncomfortable, okay, that's a problem. Maybe you've pushed it too far. Maybe you're trying to stretch too much initially, okay? But if you can push a little bit, feel that level of discomfort, and then come back and you're at a relaxed state again, you're doing it correctly, okay? And another thing that you might want to think about when you're stretching is it's okay to do a little bit of aerobic activity before you stretch, because that gets the blood flow and the circulation in the muscles, and that will help you to, you don't want to pull a muscle trying to stretch and push too far, okay? So it's important to get that circulation in. It might even be just a little bit of deep breathing. That also helps with circulation. So, again, all of these things you want to make sure that you're talking to your a personal trainer or a physiotherapist about, so that you get a proper routine in and they can monitor you as well, especially if you're starting out for the first time. Okay. Now, the fourth thing is balance. The fourth type of exercise is balance. This is very important, especially as you're aging. Balance becomes affected. And like doctor said, we don't want you to fall. Everything is to prevent you from falling, right? Sure. So with balance, again, there's no change without challenge. So we do want you to have a degree of challenge, but making sure that you're in a safe environment when you're doing this. You have a chair behind you. There's maybe a table or a counter or something where you can, reach out to, or start with using your hands first so you get the motions down correctly. You get confident in what you're doing, and then slowly take away that support. You can even use your walker or your cane. Those are other options to have some level of support while you're doing the balance exercises.
Oh, thank you very much. That was a lot of knowledge, right? Yes, thank you.
That was very comprehensive.
Yes, comprehensive. Dr. Mario, I want to know what are the barriers to this physical activity and what can we, do about them?
Yeah, that's actually quite a loaded question because I think if we look at ourselves, we'll all agree that we do have barriers to physical. We all start off wanting to be active and we make plans and sometimes we get down to it and we can't sustain it. And sometimes we can't get started because we sort of put it away for another day. Does that resonate with?
Yes,
okay,
correct.
so I'm not the only one. But I think, and then there are some barriers which I think would all acknowledge are things which we can't control, right? Things like the weather, our pavements, the traffic on the road. There are some things that we just cannot change. Maybe access to a park, or if we want to go to a gym or we want to go to a fitness center, access to a fitness center. These are barriers which are, for all practical purposes, largely out of our control, right? But then there are also other barriers that we have. I don't know. Do you have barriers to physical activity?
Well, lack of motivation would be one, wouldn't it?
I don't know. But is that? Would you say that's your major barrier?
Yeah, I would say, because now if I may give an example, there was a priest who I was accompanying in his aging and particularly sickness, because he was diagnosed with cancer. And when I accompanied him to the doctor and the doctor spoke to him, I had several conversations with him, and I said to him, what does it feel to know that, this is lurking over you? And he said, in my life, I always knew what was primary and what was secondary. Because I had asked him, what does it feel to be in the shadow, literally, of death because of your cancer? And he said, I think it's a special grace. And I said, what do you mean by that? He said, I always knew what was primary and what was secondary, but now it comes to me with an urgency. And I think when we begin to see that there has to be an urgency about these things, it's not something that we can just drift along and go along, but we say, this is vital for me, not only to add life to my years, but to add years to my life. I think that kind of a motivation that we need to have, and we don't have to wait for an emergency for it to happen. And that's the context.
Yeah. What do you all feel are the barriers that you all have to becoming more physically active or exercise?
So, starting with family, one thing that you can do to address this is maybe you can exercise with your family, with your children. You can make it a fun activity for everyone involved.
But I find most of them very comfortable by calling the Zomato and some Dunzo, and everything seems to be so convenient, and no one wants to take up, they call a maid to do the housework. I just wanted to know generally what do you think about this, Doctor?
I work a lot with senior citizens, and what I have observed is that this digital fascination is not just among children but also a lot among seniors, and they prefer to watch videos or their series or whatever it is that they're watching, and they do not dedicate that time for physical activity or exercise. So how do you think we could help them combat this issue?
Do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit within you, given by God? You belong no longer to yourselves. Remember at what price you have been bought, and make your body serve the glory of God. In other words, your body is not incidental. We are God's marvelous masterpiece.
This brings us to the end of the first part of the discussion on physical activity and exercise for the elderly. We will continue this discussion in the next episode of Aging Gracefully, a talk show for Evergreens.